And so Empower Ed is a teacher voice organization, and we're doing a kind of a teacher-led campaign on reevaluating, right, our education governance system. And we say mayoral control, but the reality is that's a shorthand, right, for a lot of things that go beyond that, right, in terms of how we're trying to restore community voice in the education system. And so as part of that campaign, we held a virtual summit in December with over 100 stakeholders, parents, principals, students, teachers, et cetera, and advocates. And now we're kind of doing ward-based conversations to gather more feedback on where we should be advocating there. Pretty sure this will be a pretty vocal group, so I don't think anyone will have trouble clearing their throats. I'm going to turn it over to Patricia Stamper, our Ward 6 fellow, who will guide a discussion.
Good evening. How are you guys doing? Let's do a quick movement break, because I've been sitting, you've been sitting, we've all probably been sitting staring at our screens all day. So let's stretch for a minute, because yeah, sitting for a while in front of a screen, it kind of sucks, but we're recording. So, and we're going to use good words today. So my name is Patricia Stamper. I live in Ward 7. I work in Ward 6. I have a DCPS child that goes to school in Ward 5, and my youngest attends a daycare in Ward 8. Therefore, I'm very interested in what happens east of the river, FYI, to be fully transparent, especially because I work at Minor Elementary School in Capitol Hill, and my students come from all over DC, not just Ward 6. With that being said, I would like to, hold on, let me get the other screen. Hi, there it is. No. Hi, there we go. First question, no pressure. Do you, as student, teacher, parent, community leader, feel empowered in our education system? Why or why not? If anyone like to share an example, feel free to use the raise hand feature button and you will be recognized, and we will go from there. We're just going to hop right into it. Anyone? Don't worry.
Hey, Patricia, this is George, and unfortunately I'm doing this through the phone, so I don't have those features in front of me, but can you elaborate a little more in terms of empower?
Empowered. Empowered, in my opinion, my definition is, do I feel that I'm knowledgeable in the education landscape here in DC? Do I feel as a teacher and as a parent and community leader empowered in our education system? I like to tell my parents and my colleagues, if I wouldn't allow my own child to participate in this, I don't want my students to do it. That's just me personally, my personal level of comfort. And if it's not good enough for my own children, it's not good enough for my students. So do you feel empowered in our education system? Like, would you send your child, your grandchild, your uncle, daddy, cousin, brethren to a DC public school? For instance, I jokingly tell people, do you see Miranda Bowser coming to a DC public school near you and entering an early childhood educational classroom? Let's be real. That's when I say empowered. Like, do you trust this current education system here in DC?
Isn't Miranda too young yet for school? I don't
Oh,
know.
she's getting there. She's about to be ready for pre-K 3. I believe she's 2. So she's getting ready for pre-K 3 soon. Because I have a 2-year-old. How do I know? Is because I have my own 2-year-old. And so next school year, he can go to school probably once he turns 3. So yeah, that's why I jokingly say that, because yeah. So does anyone have any suggestions? I see Grace, I recognize your face. So I'm going to call on you because I trust you and I know you have something to say.
Me? Okay. I feel I have great feelings toward my local neighborhood school where Juniper goes. I feel really frustrated in terms of on the sort of system level decisions that central office and the mayor make that impact our schools. And sometimes I feel like our schools succeed in spite of the direction coming from the top, not because of direction and guidance from the top. And that has been very frustrating. I occasionally feel empowered, but it's feels like so much work. Like my friends out in Montgomery County, they're like, how much time do you spend doing this digital equity stuff? Like what is going on there? And it's like, so I occasionally feel empowered, but it takes so much effort, you know, whether it's PTA or advocating for stuff. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Grace. I really appreciate that. Now to elaborate on what Miss Grace and Juniper added, do you feel like the education system, like we have an input to affect decisions? Like, do you feel like your voice is actually capturing her? Like Anne was saying she was worried that we're recording. So our principal always tells me anything that you say on Microsoft Teams, you better be okay with the Washington Post seeing it, with whoever's seeing it. So we, I'm not trying to pick on you, Anne, but I know for me personally, sometimes I have to catch myself because I may have choice words that may not be necessarily appropriate for the situation, but it's how I feel. I feel that no one's hearing me. So with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
Can I just say, Donica, do you want to say aloud what you wrote in the chat?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay. I just, I think it kind of encapsulates both sides of the coin that Grace was talking about and that you were talking about, you know, that I feel very empowered to act and to say things. And unlike educators, I feel pretty insulated from retribution, but as a parent, but I don't trust the system and I don't feel like we're often heard. And so I feel like Grace, I feel like sometimes we're banging our heads against a wall because I think that the city sort of, I'm hearing it even today in that meeting they had where they're all like, wow, DC didn't give us accurate or honest information or a plan. It's like, they never have. And just now you're real. I feel like literally like I was banging my head against the wall today because that just proves to me that all of us who've been talking for, I don't know, however many 20 years, Suzanne, or 30?
20.
Whatever.
Thank you, Danica. Jonathan, did you have anything to add? I see you staring intently, but I feel like you had something to add. No? Okay, that's fine. I respect that.
Valerie,
I am not a DCPS parent. But this is all very interesting information.
Okay, I respect that. Thank you. Miss Erin Johnston, did you have anything you wanted to add? No? Okay, well, we can move on. That's cool.
Valerie Jablo had something in the chat.
Oh, Miss Valerie. Okay, Miss Valerie Jablo said, I never felt empowered as a parent in DCPS. I'm on my 15th year and it's been exhausting to get anything changed. To me, that pains me because I am a DCPS parent and a DCPS employee, yet I am told that I'm on the lowest realm of DCPS employee. I jokingly say that I'm in the minor leagues of DCP public schools. Like I tell people, this is where I go to cry because anything that I say could be possibly used against me. So I've gotten really good at saying, as a community member, as a DC public school parent, because I'm an employee. So the Hatch Act is real, guys. It applies to employees, but not the president. That's a whole different discussion. All right, moving on. Question 2. What values do you want to see in decision-making in our education system? Someone touched on that earlier. I know someone said it feels like they're banging their head. I know last budget season, it was right before COVID happened, we were in budget engagement talks at my school, and none of the budget, everything that we suggested, it wasn't in our budget. There were 6 different budgets for one school. However, the budget that we approved on as a staff and as an LSAT academic team was not the budget that was, became final. So what are, how are you guys, do you participate? What values do you want to see in decision-making in our education system? For instance, I personally believe the chancellor should be an elected position. I believe there should not be mayorally appointed position of OSCE. I personally feel that should be an elected position because then you're beholden to the people rather than to your boss. But that's just me as a community member and as a DCPS parent. Would Ms. Grace said values, respect, listening to people on the ground like parents, teachers, and students. Preach, Grace, because it bugs me internally as a parent and as an employee that my voice as a teacher and a parent was not heard. in the reopening plans. Like they totally just said, oh, teachers, y'all don't know what y'all doing. But we're in the classroom, we're the ones simulcasting, trying to do small groups, doing breakouts, trying to get little Johnny not to show his bottom to the camera and still teach with this child in person. Like, how is that equitable? How does that work? Does anyone have anything they would like to add on that question?
Hey, Patricia, this is George again. So to add to what you were just saying, and I'm going to use the LSAT as an example. When you say respect and listening, and I saying you guys know more about what goes on in your individual schools. I've used LSAT as the example, and particularly with the budgets. I believe the teachers, along with the parents and community of the school, they know what is the best need for your particular school. And then when you're given budget saying you got this pot of money, you got these X amount of positions you have to fill, and then when you speak with your LSAT members and they say, oh, okay, we don't quite see it this way. We want to be able to have thus, and so, and have that autonomy. Now, in many cases, when it goes back to central office, sometimes it's approved. Sometimes it's like, no, we know better.
Okay, I totally agree with a lot of what you're saying, and I've experienced it personally. Scott, did you want to put up the slides to share with our panel, with our friends here?
Sorry, yeah, I saw Danica has something in
Oh,
the
it just popped. I'm
chat.
sorry. I didn't see
I
it.
will put that up.
Can I read it, Danica, or read it out loud, or would you like to read it to the group?
I'm happy to, or you can.
No. I insist. I want someone other's voice than mine. Go ahead.
Okay, so I just said the biggest thing I want is transparency. I believe if the system, DCPS and charter system, were all transparent, then we could start to have honest conversations. And as long as they continue to hide the ball and data and council lets them, then we go nowhere. And it'll just continue to be the mayor, everyone on their side, pleasing the mayor in the happy talk that she wants. And we're just complaining parents. And I really believe transparency is how you start to build trust and understanding. I really believe that at the heart of all of this is that.
Thank you, Danica. I agree as well. I also saw another comment from Miss Valerie Jablo. Do you mind reading your comment out loud for the group?
Sure. Sorry, I'm off on video because I can't have video and audio. So there is that.
Life happens.
I get very annoyed because parents who testify, parents who meet with council officials are often equated with people who are actually paid to show up at the Wilson building, whether with the mayor or the staff or the council or the staff. And it really diminishes our role as taxpayers and people with skin in the game. We are sending our kids to schools. And I think teachers are treated much in the same way, and they have real skin in the game as well. But the end result is that there's no check on elected officials. Like they have had hearings of late where they have limited public input. So parents who didn't sign up fast enough or, get in the right queue, they were let out. And then, they had the hearing the other day last week on learning loss, at which there were no people who were actually affected. There were no students, no parents, and for reasons I cannot even conceive, no teachers. The only people in the District of Columbia who are actually on the front lines every single day dealing with learning loss. I don't even understand how to even talk to people who think that that is okay.
I second that. And Jean K, second Danica's comment as well. Does anyone else have any other input before we move to the slide from Mr. Goldstein? Okay, Scott. All right. Scott, do you want to read or do you want me to read?
Sure. So no, I can introduce it and then you can keep going from there. So, part of our engagement on this has been to do a district-wide survey on what does reforming the education governance system look like? What are the specific reforms that would increase community voice, which is at the heart of this? And I will also say that the driving force for us is how do we reform the system in a way that puts racial justice front and center, right? We do not have disempowered school boards in majority white districts in the United States. This is a thing that happens, right, in communities of color. And so how we elevate those voices and how we increase community input, transparency, et cetera, across the board. So from that survey and the hundreds of responses, we've collected what people think are the specific reforms they'd like to see. So we also wanted to bring that to you as some of the ones we've seen the most and get your input on which of these you feel like would make the biggest impact on increasing community voice.
Thank you, Scott. And not to put her on the spot, but I see Ward 3 State Board of Education Representative Miss Ruth Wattenberg. Miss Ruth Wattenberg is awesome. Also, I personally believe she should have more power as a state board representative. I feel that she should have more power. Ruth, is there any of these that are most compelling to you?
Well, thank you. That was such a nice introduction. Give me a moment. I came in late because I was on the State Board of Ed Student Advisory Committee meeting. So let me listen and let me look and come back to me.
Okay, understandable. Well, I don't want to, yes, Ruth is awesome. I don't want to be redundant and read to you guys, but the one thing that sticks out to me personally is the one that says change rules to allow DC public school teachers to run for State Board of Education. Why not? Why wouldn't you have State Board of Education members that are actually, as one of you guys said, have a skin in the game? I think Miss Danica, no, was it Valerie? It was Miss Valerie Jalbro. What do you guys think about that? Do you think that's a good thing? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think it's a good thing because I think right now charter school employees are able to run for the State Board of Education, but for some reason DCPS employees aren't. I don't know how it is in other cities if they do allow staff for the agency that's kind of being overseen by the State Board of Education to be on this, school board or in other cities, but at least it seems like something that would be fair to me, given that charter employees can run.
Yes, I know from my personal experience, I was told if I won, when I put my name in the hat, that it would be a violation of the Hatch Act and I would have to resign from my position. So I had to change my approach. So I personally believe that should be changed. Thank you, Ms. Wells. Does anyone else have any other thoughts on some of these proposed changes that are most compelling to you?
I'd like to second the idea of parity on the board. So I don't know enough about all the rules of why teachers can't run or DCPS employees is the real, but it shouldn't be half our system can run and half our system can't. It's the bottom line. And it's a totally unfair perspective to put on state board. So to me, there should be parity for everybody. If it allows it, everyone gets to run, or if somehow that's not allowed, then nobody should. And I just want to second, we've had a little bit of discussion, a few of us like Betsy and I, but I think the independence of OSSI is just it's so unsexy. It is it's so difficult to explain to people in the public, but it is absolutely the one thing that could get us something towards real transparency and real accountability, I just can't say enough how I think that's what the next step our system needs. I don't, Betsy agrees it's not sexy. Ooh, Aussie independence. It's like, what? Digital technology for every kid is very sexy. Aussie independence is not sexy. But I can't say, I'm still struggling though, I will be honest, with how that person comes to be. I'm not sure where I stand on how that person should be, if they're elected or if they're state board appointed or council or some mix. So that's just my 2 cents on that.
Thank you, Danica.
I think I'm going to throw this question back to Patricia and Scott. I think some of these things are, maybe they're relatively easy. And let me just say, like, I think getting the principal contracts extended. I mean, I think that's something that, that's something that could be done. I could see that happening. But like completely ending mayoral control, making the public charter school board accountable to an elected public body, those things are huge. And I'm not sure in my lifetime if we'll see some of those things. So I'm just wondering, have you kind of divided these up into things that you think are, realistically achievable in the near term, things that are going to take more, public campaigns, other things to make happen?
Sorry, I'll just say, we have a lot of survey results on this already, both from teachers and community members, about which are the most popular. And then our teachers are going through the process of which, thinking about the political feasibility, which would make the biggest impact. But we want to do these listening sessions with each ward before they get to that point to add to what we've seen from surveys already.
So I can just add another thought here. I don't think that you can end mayoral control without also making the public charter school board accountable to some elected body. I think some of these things need to be linked together in moving forward, because I think they're so critical to the education system. And to, like maybe in mayoral control, but still have an autonomous public charter school board, we still will have huge problems in our education system if we allow that to happen. So I think I think it needs to be thought through, how these things are linked, and looking holistically at them when you're making decisions about what to move forward with.
Suzanne, can I jump in and say, on that point, I think a lot of times people fall into the trap of different is better. And a lot of times different isn't better. So really thinking through what are the intended, but what are the unintended consequences that, that might happen, and the other power structures that might rise up, I think is really critical to this work.
That's a good point, Betsy.
So, I'm sorry, did anyone have something?
Yes, it's Ruth.
Yes.
I'm ready to jump in.
Go, Miss Ruth Wattenberg.
So
Yes.
a couple of things. So first of all, I think to just echo everybody, this idea of making sure that OSSI is overseen by somebody, that's so important, because otherwise we just have, the mayor's schools are being overseen by the mayor's superintendent, and bad news doesn't get out, honest news doesn't get out, just to restate all that. And I do agree that we need to sort of figure out the structure. I'm not for them being totally independent, which I think is an idea that is maybe emerging, sort of like a CFO kind of person. And I do feel like schools, they're so personal. We need to have, all of us, we use the schools, need to have a way to have our voices heard. And the second thing I want to just throw out is, insofar as we can't do this all at once, that one idea is to sort of come up with sort of a list of things that we want to have that are most important to have some elected body deal with. And I wanted to throw out a few and see if other people had ideas. One is, and it's up here, is the opening and closing of schools. I mean, this is something that we all see. It drives people crazy. People need to have a voice in this, and they don't. And it's just constant, and it's awful. That's one. Another one that I hear a lot about and see a lot about is principals being fired. You know, principals get fired. And I believe in a system where, you know, somebody on top is going to have to say, this principal isn't any good and has to go. But we all know a lot of times we feel like they're being let go because they're objecting, not to a policy in general, like employees shouldn't always do, but something that's about safety, or it's about the mental health of students. It's something very big that there should be a public debate about. It's not even that they can't make that decision, but it can't be private. If the principal at Walls is fired because he thought the schools weren't safe, or the principal at Boone is fired because she doesn't think that the approach to discipline is appropriate, those should be public issues. So another thing is how you bring that before a state board or some kind of board. Again, it's got to be private, it's a personnel issue, but somebody needs to be looking at that. That can't just be the system gets to do that in that top-down way. So I'm would be very interested in hearing other things like that. Those just two that have been in the news recently. Oh, and I want to say one, and I'm just going to add one other thing, which is part of what I think the pandemic has shown and really put in more relief is how important it is to have just regular. I mean, think about if you're in another place. A lot of districts are having problems with reopening. It's a tough situation, but how different it would be if the people who made the decisions every month had to come and hear from all the stakeholders, and in that same setting, their bosses, i.e. the elected board, was able to say, you know, so-and-so from school XYZ said this needs to be done, or that we need to worry about that. And I want to hear about it next month. You know, that's part of so much of what we're missing. And so you don't have the discussion and the compromises really about how do you deal with this very tough problem in a way that relates to all the different stakeholders. That's it.
Thank you, Ms. Wattenberg. I really, really appreciated your input. Does anyone else have any other input? Because I respect people's time, Ms. Wells, and it's 7:30, and according to your agenda, I don't want to. If anyone has any thoughts, by all means, please share. But I like to respect people's time. And Scott, I don't know if you had anything else.
Well, before we wrap up, I will say off of what Ruth said, that one of the idea that's come up a few times in these conversations is whether principal firings should go somewhere else before they get made final, meaning like should if DCPS wants to fire a principal, especially before the end of a year, they explain the rationale to the state board, for example, and the state board can decide whether the public hearing needs to be held, right? So that somebody would get informed about it by law. They can still make the decision, but there's another agency, right? For example, I'll just mention that's something that comes up. I don't know if anyone wants to touch on that issue. I know we have to go, and appreciate everyone's time. But I will say just
a few more minutes, so don't rush.
Okay. So if anyone has a thought on that, and then I'll close out with what the next steps in the process are.
I think the principal firing thing, it just seems to me from things I've experienced that principals are human. They make mistakes. And it just seems to me like there's not a willingness on the part of the system to work with the principal if there's differences with them on something. And I understand that. I don't think anybody wants, they're talked about publicly really, maybe why they're being fired, but it just seems there needs to be more I don't know, and just said less of a heavy hand from DCPS on the principals when they disagree with something they've done, and trying to work out a problem rather than using firing them as the way to solve it. And Sandra should talk about this. She's dealt with this more than any of us recently.
I'm feeling very triggered right now as I was texting Danica about this, so it's probably better that I don't. 100%. It was, incredibly, on top of the pandemic, it was incredibly destabilizing for our entire school community. Mid-year, out of the blue, it's been tough, and it's been tough since then. We're trying to get stability on a principal right now, the interim. So it's got an ongoing effect, and definitely. And we talked about trust earlier in this conversation, and how we feel, I think for the most part, we feel like we trust our local school, we trust our teachers, we trust our principals, or else we wouldn't have our kids in there. We don't trust the system, and that kind of action just really solidifies that, okay, there's a good reason for that. Like, we're definitely not part of this process. And if you've ever been through a panel, a principal interview panel, it's the best theater, and you can make a lot of money if you want to place bets on how it's going to play out. Sorry, there's another competing call in my house. So anyway, but I could say a lot more, but you don't want to hear me on this.
Thank you, Sandra. Feel free to share your thoughts with Ruth Wattenberg. She put her email in the chat.
But I just want to call out that Patricia said something really valuable that I think is also a good place to wrap up to, which is, Patricia said, in my opinion, we should cultivate a system of growth. I mean, this is what we don't have, right? When it comes, and I think we don't have this mindset with students, we don't have this mindset with teachers, we don't have this mindset with our principals, which is that we have systems that believe accountability is the end goal, right? Instead of, right, a process, instead of growth, right? And so the systems are set up to hold people accountable in a public way, rather than think about how they develop and grow. And I think that's true about a lot of our education system work. So that's part of, I think, what we want to hear is, like, how do we change these to growth-based systems rather than punitive by design? So appreciate all your comments. Just as a follow-up, a couple things. One, I'm posting in the chat the survey that we put out. This is kind of the wonky side of this, which is like, here's all these ideas. What do you think about the different ideas, which would be the most effective? But we're also going to do a broader public engagement, like clipboard on the street. Does our education system work for you? To get to people who are not in the weeds of all this stuff, to combine with this feedback. But that survey is one piece. And then the second is, we're going to be doing a lot of advocacy on restoring community voice over the next months, years, perhaps. But I want to put in the chat, this is, we're also collecting videos on kind of reasonings for shifting to bring more community voice to our education system or reforming mayoral control. So that is the email that you would send it to if you're interested in doing that, which is organizing@weareempowered.org. And Patricia and Liz and our other fellows who are working on this, right, I'll be using this as we gather feedback, bring it together. And then we have a summit so the last link I'll drop on March 21st, where mayoral control community voice will be one of 6 different topics, including teacher diversity and retention, re-envisioning education post-pandemic, restorative practice in police and schools. We'll have sessions on all those things. So I'm dropping the link in the chat for the summit as well. And we'll continue to engage all of you on all of that. Thanks, everyone.
All right, thank you.
But Patricia probably has to go because we had a 2-hour meeting before she even got on.
I really appreciate seeing you guys. I see our State Board of Education representative from Ward 6, Dr. Sutter. How you doing, ma'am?
Hi, I'm sorry to be late. I was with our students and before that with the DPR Ward 6 meeting.
Oh, the Ready
And
to
before that
Play.
with Food Project in Southwest. It's been too many Tuesday meetings.
Well, I don't know if you want to throw in your hat in the game or cut your skin at this, but one of the last, Scott, what was our last question?
We can send it along the slide.
Okay,
I'm happy
cool.
to send that along with the notes.
Happy to. And I'm excited to be attending the Empower Ed Teacher Summit in March. So I'll be there for that and excited to lend my voice then.
Thank you, Ms. Sutter. Thank
And
you.
I'm also just going to say goodbye. It was great talking with you all about the governance, and hello to my colleague, Jessica Sutter.
Hi.
And I'll see you all soon.
Nice
All
to
right.
see you, Ruth.
Thank you, Ruth,
Bye.
Scott, and Patricia. Bye. So we are going to turn it over now to Laura and Anne and Jonathan for a budget discussion.
Hi, everybody. We're back. I think most of you have seen our song and dance in the non-virtual world, but we are delighted to join you again this year. I was trying to count up the number of years. I'm thinking maybe this is number 5.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
But our first Zoom one. So we're like fresh all over again. We have a fabulous team here to join you. I brought people who are much smarter than I am. Many of you know Ms. Ann Phelps, who used to be with Councilmember Allen's office and is now with the council's budget office. And we have Jonathan Antista, who is our education and all-around numbers guy. The two of them, they know all the things. I'm just driving the slideshow. I just sit back and watch them work. So I'm going to go ahead and do screen share. We're going to run you through sort of a broad overview and then some details. And then hopefully we will have time at the end to take any questions. Let's see here. All right. Can everyone see that?
I can see it.
All right, that's a good sign. We are, here we go. So we'll start with an overview, talk a little bit about education, and then run you through some of the things that are more specific to this year's timeline, which is, unlike last year, more similar to past years, although it will be in a fully virtual format, so a little different.
Right. So thank you so much for having me. As Laura said, my name is Jonathan Antista. I am the council's deputy budget director. And I also, in addition to that larger role, specifically focus on education and human services as well. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about sort of the district's budget writ large, some sort of high level information. So the one we always like to start with, of course, is the size of the district's operating budget. So the operating budget is how the district spends its money on goods and services and what we provide to district residents. And what this slide just sort of goes through is where that money comes from when we put together the budget every year. So this year, the operating budget that we approved last July is $16.9 billion. About half of that, 8.6 billion, is purely local funds, the money we raise from taxes. And this is the money we sort of have the most control over that funds a significant portion of our services. The second biggest pot is our federal grants and our Medicaid dollars that we get as when we are treated as a state like any other jurisdiction. And that's about 3.7 billion. The bulk of that is Medicaid, is our federal Medicaid program. And this is our approved budget from July. So this does not account, for example, for the additional federal money that came in the stimulus bill in December. So that pot's actually a little bit larger at this point. Our enterprise funds, these are our sort of random assortment of things like the Health Benefit Exchange Authority or sort of the Washington Convention Center. There's just sort of this mix of things that the government does, but that's funded from sort of a different set of sources. Special purpose revenue, these are our fees and fines that usually pay for the things they collect. The example I usually like to give for this is, for example, the Board of Medicine, which licenses our doctors. There's a fee when you pay your license fee. Those fees go into a special purpose revenue fund, and those funds pay for the Board of Medicine to do its thing. So it sort of goes hand in hand. Dedicated taxes. This is where we say there's a tax, and usually a small percentage of that tax is then dedicated to a particular purpose. For example, the Commission on Arts and Humanities, or the Housing Production Trust Fund, or a couple of places where we pull taxes out for a dedicated purpose. And the last part here is actually a very small amount. I like to emphasize this. Federal payments, this is direct payments we get to the district, is actually a pretty small part of our budget. So we actually, everything else we get as nature of being a state like everyone else, we get this very small portion that's federal payments. Next slide, sorry. And then of course, where does the money go? So these are what are called clusters in the budget system. They're just sort of big buckets of agencies and programs and things that come together. As you can see, about 30% of it is our human support services agencies. This is Medicaid, this is housing and homelessness, this is child and family services, and education, which also includes things like Parks and Recreation and the Department of Employment Services, things that sort of roll up into an education system.
Library.
Libraries, and a favorite agency in the entire government, the DC Public Library. And then, as you can see, there's the other ones. So public safety, there's firefighters, police, those information, government direction support. That's us. That's the council. That's the mayor. Public works, snow removal, those kinds of things. Financing, those are the things we need to do to run the government, borrow money for the capital budget, et cetera. And the enterprise funds, it's sort of a match to those other ones. So next slide. So one thing we wanted to just call out, because we know this year and last year in FY2020 and this year in FY2021, of course, tough budget years as well, as we all know. And a key component of the district's ability to respond to COVID as robustly as we have been able to in a lot of ways is because of the strength of our reserve funds. And so the district has 4 reserve funds: rainy day funds, bank accounts, savings accounts, call them what you will, but sort of we have these 4 reserve funds that are to be used when emergencies pop up. 2 of them are federally mandated and 2 of them are locally mandated. And they each have different rules for how much goes into them. They're a percentage of the operating budget from the previous year. They have different repayment rules, those kinds of things. And the goal always is to get to 60 days cash on hand. You can see the math at the bottom of that screen about what that means. And it's a best practice to try and get to that point in order to pay your bills, in order to dip into your reserves when that is necessary. And so if you go to the next slide, this actually goes in a little more detail about what these funds are. So the first one is our emergency cash reserve. This is really reserved for only the gravest of emergencies. This one was full at the end of FY2020 and remains full. We have not yet had to dip into this to pay for things, although we came very close in FY2020 to having to dip into this emergency, the last of our reserve funds. Contingency cash. This is used for unanticipated things in non-COVID times. The most common thing that you see this is for snow removal. A big snowstorm comes, we have to pay for extra salt or extra plow hours or those kinds of things. It's paid out of contingency cash because it's outside the regular budget process, and then it gets repaid in a certain period of time. This is where a lot of draws, while we were waiting for federal stimulus and the money that was going to come through, we paid for it out of contingency, and we have been repaying some of this as those federal reimbursements have come through. But this is an ongoing use of funds, and I don't know the exact number as of today, but a significant chunk of this is being spent as we speak to help pay for things right now. The cash flow reserve, this is what we use to pay our bills on a daily basis because our tax collections do not match our expenses. So for example, payroll, $100 and some odd million every single month. But of course, one of our biggest tax bases are property taxes, but those only come in twice a year. So the cash flow reserve is our way of being able to pay our bills without having to borrow that money and pay interest on that money and actually cost more to keep the government running. Having this reserve, and likewise this reserve, being used to its fullest extent this year to help balance the budget. And finally, our fiscal stabilization reserve, which is really, it's used to help cover a lot of things. And this year it's empty. It's essentially empty. It's down to, I think, about $5 million. But this one is being used, almost all of it, to balance the budget. So although our reserves were full at the end of FY2020, which is fantastic, we are using a significant portion of these in FY 2021 and throughout to balance the budget so we can keep providing the level of services that we are providing. Next slide. Of course, the other side is the capital budget. The capital budget this year is 1.7 billion in FY21. It's a 6-year plan, but this is the amount of money set to be spent this fiscal year. This is smaller than this has been in the past as a result of the reduction in the budget, the reduction in revenues, and the changes to the operating budget that were made because the capital budget is dependent on that, both as a percentage, we have a debt cap, but then also you have to pay for how much you borrow. And we had to be able to pay for the servicing costs of all of that debt. And so all of that factors into the $1.7 billion that was in the capital improvement plan for this fiscal year, which is less than it has been in the past. As you can see, the big chunks of this are DDOT, our roads, our bridges, and DCPS, the school modernizations that are ongoing. But then there's the money to WMATA, there's the projects under DEMPED, there's the money we put in for the housing authority. There's a whole host of these that make up the capital budget, but it is smaller this year because of those factors that are out there. And this is just a different visualization of that as it specifically relates to schools, both as a dollar value and as a percentage of the CIP. It is less than it has been in years past. But as a percentage of the CIP, it is actually fairly similar between FY20 and 21. The dollar value is less again because the entirety of the capital budget is less. And remember also, of course, it's a 6-year capital improvements plan. So the 1.7 billion in FY21 does not account for the schools that are starting in FY22 or 23, or their planning phases are coming later on. They're still in the capital improvement plan, but that money isn't set to be spent in FY 2021. So this is just, again, a reflection of this fiscal year that we're going to spend this money on. Next slide. So this one, as I think we are all very intimately familiar with, is the Uniform Per Student Funding Formula, the UPSFF, which is the way we fund public education, K through 12 public education in the district. It begins with a base, and then weights are applied for various characteristics: school grade level, at risk, special education needs, those kinds of things. And that's how we build the pots of money for DCPS and for the charter schools, and then they go and do their budget. So this year we were able to approve the 3% increase that was in the mayor's budget. We know that there had been talk of her I originally wanted to propose a 4% increase, and then after COVID having to lower that. But the council was happy to support that and continue that 3% increase this year. Next slide.
So this looks at both operating and capital in the last budget in FY21. So the right side is capital specific to Ward 6. So these are all the things that were funded or part of the capital budget. Some of these are just planning dollars. They're not the full amount of the project, but it's the start of getting that full funding. So DCPS has been pretty strict about once they put those planning dollars in recent years, they've then followed that up by adding the construction fund. So some of these schools like Tyler and J.O. Wilson and Seton that were added for planning amounts, we hope to see in FY22 that they are then added to the construction schedule. On the operating side, we had the 3% increase in student funding. Those technology expenses we can circle back to a little bit later, because I think that was significantly augmented by federal funds as the COVID relief dollars were transmitted later after this budget process concluded. But also student mental health funding, and there was the loss of those Head Start grant dollars.
So we also wanted to sort of highlight, of course, one of the biggest factors around the budget right now is all of the federal stimulus money, the two major pieces of legislation that passed last year, and the one that is currently working through Congress, the President's Recovery Plan that is currently making its way through. So all told, the district has received about $6.7 billion total when you look at all the sort of range of federal responses that have come through. The bulk of this, however, the district is sort of the pass through. It's unemployment insurance or the money that went to WMATA. So it's coming and it's impacting, and it is having an impact economically and financially for the district, but it isn't really money in our budget per se. The bulk of it is not money we have any control over. We're just sort of that pass through in that sense. The biggest direct fund payment we got is what's called the Coronavirus Relief Fund. This is the state and local fund you may have heard something about. You may also have heard that, of course, we only got $495 million instead of the $1.25 billion we were owed as a state. We were not treated as a state in that first bill, and we lost out on about $725 or $750 million. The good news is, as Congress is debating the current recovery bill, the current version that will be considered by the House includes not just new money in this fund, well over $1 billion new money. It also gives us back the 700 some odd million dollars that we lost. So we are keeping our fingers on our toes crossed that money that additional money that we lost on last time will be coming to us if this bill goes through and passes. So we are cautiously optimistic about that. And it specifically included some big buckets of grant dollars for education. In three major buckets, there was a governor's fund, which had a lot of flexibility, a K-12 fund, and then money for higher education as well. So the district received tens of millions of dollars in grants, as Laura mentioned, money that's helped with technology or other things and schools reopening. So there's been a big influx of money on the federal side that has obviously made a huge difference throughout both FY 2020 and so far in FY 2021 as well. So I think that the way the budget's going to work this year, as we said, it's more on the regular schedule. So the mayor is set to transmit her budget on March 31st. Hearings begin shortly thereafter. They will be virtual this year. Although the council will be holding multiple hearings simultaneously this year as part of the process instead of the one we held at a time last time. So there'll be sort of increased opportunities and time periods for hearings. The committees will mark up their recommendations for the agencies under their purview. Then our office reconciles all that, puts it all together into a package with additional changes recommended by the chairman. It's the chairman's budget. And then we go through our wonderful vote process, which will be done hopefully in June this year and not way in the end of July as we all lived through last year. As we also know, we have from that March 31st, we have 70 days to complete the budget by law. And so it's a condensed timeline, made of course more difficult by COVID, but hopefully the second go around of a virtual budget will have continue to work even stronger on that. So, but the timing will be very similar to what was before COVID and all the changes that were necessary.
So this is sort of the traditional DCPS budget timeline. I know that they have been looking to make changes to their budget process, although I have not really heard where they are with that this year, given all of the challenges associated with doing it all virtually and the added excitement with the return to more in-person learning. So what you see here is more reflective of past years. It's possible that they have been making some changes that they had been committed to previously, but I don't know if they are implementing those this year or if they're going to push that to next year. But the goal is always to try to get schools more time to consider those initial school level budgets before having to turn them around, which has traditionally always been this super tight fire drill, where you just get a day or two to try to absorb all of this information, make a bunch of really hard decisions. You don't really get time to involve your school community, and you have to get it right back to central office. And they're under a tight timeline on their side too, but they have been considering ways to try to make that a little more parent and school focused. So I guess I don't really have an answer for you on exactly what that's going to look like this year, but this is the basic outline for previous years.
So I'm not really sure why I have this slide. I think they just know that if I'm quiet for very long, bad things happen. Like why we're recording so that I use clean language. But so in just broad terms, the difference between the capital budget and the operating budget, I think. So capital dollars are borrowed dollars for the most part, and they have a lot of very specific limitations. Projects, they have to be things that they have to be spent on assets that the district owns, that the things that we spend them on have to have a long lifespan. They projects have to be over $250,000. There's a whole variety of things that are tied to when you borrow those kind of dollars. And operating dollars are more like the people and the things that you're using. And I've described this in this meeting before as capital is the building, you turn it upside down and shake it. Everything that falls is operating, everything that remains is capital. So it's like the big structural things, and operating are things like paper and people and pens. So the council's role, a few slides back, Jonathan went through very briefly the timeline, and the budget's coming on March 31st. Up until that time, it's the mayor's ball game. So currently her team is in budget formulation, and sort of now is the time, if you haven't already, to reach out to the mayor's budget folks to talk about what your priorities are. When she submits the package to us is when the council can start moving things around. And in that timeline, we talked about the committee process before it comes to the big committee of the whole. And so it's weird this year, right? If speaking in terms of education, education is in the committee of the whole, what we like to call as little cow, the little committee of the whole, which is just the agencies underneath the little committee of the whole. So that's now all the school stuff, but it also includes DCRA, Office of Planning, like a whole bunch of other random things. And so the committee of the whole will be having hearings on all those things. And then you have judiciary that has its hearings, and government operations that has those hearings. Those are all little committees, for want of a better word. And then when we go to put it together in the big cow, which is the big committee of the whole, which everybody sits on and looks at all of the agencies. So there are a couple of opportunities there in that process. So changes happen to budgets in the little committee level. So as Chairman Mendelson, who is chairing Little Cow with education, can tinker with all those budgets in his committee report for those agencies under his purview. And then also when we reconcile all 10 committees together into the big cow budget, there's an opportunity for changes at that point. Historically, a lot of the changes to education happen at big cow because there's council-wide priorities like increasing the UPSFF, for instance, where we've pulled money from lots of different places sort of at the end to boost that per student formula. And there are other changes too at that time. Places where you don't really have a lot of opportunity to change is the capital budget. Ever since the council passed the PACE Act, the council has, for the most part, I think fairly consistently adhered to that formula. But Laura, you can correct me on that because I don't have as much to do with the capital budget. But I think typically
there are a lot fewer moving pieces
yes.
than there used to be.
So that's sort of like how those pieces work. And then I mean, maybe it's all mysterious. I don't know. I've been in the budget office. This will be my 5th budget. And so there's still a lot that's mysterious to me, but I feel like I know it a little bit better. My part in the budget is not so much the numbers, although I do serve as the budget analyst for the little cow, for everything except education, because God bless Jonathan. And I also am the budget analyst for the Committee on Judiciary and Public Safety. So poor Councilmember Allen can't get away from me no matter what. But my main job with the budget is all the legislation. So I do the Appropriations Act, I do the Budget Support Act, which is the big behemoth piece of legislation that really is a compilation of dozens and dozens of little laws that are theoretically necessary to implement the budget. And that is part of the whole budget package and a fairly key piece for any legislative changes that have to happen. So for instance, if a council member is raising taxes and wants to use that money on something in the budget, the legislation to raise the taxes is included in the Budget Support Act. And then the spending of it is done in the Local Budget Act, which is the Appropriations Act. And the other thing I do is I keep track of all of the bills passed subject to appropriation. And you may have heard of that. A lot of times the council has to pass bills subject to appropriation if they pass them any time of the year outside of the budget, because we can't fund things except during the budget. So throughout the year, some bills may have costs that we pass subject to appropriation. I track that. I release a quarterly report that shows what was passed subject to appropriation, what the cost was when it was first estimated. I keep track of what gets funded in the next budget cycle and so on and so forth. But the budget is about the only opportunity council members have to fund bills. So a lot of times you'll see repeals of subject to appropriation clauses because bills have been funded in the Budget Support Act and the Local Budget Act. And wow, that's a lot of words.
And I'll just add that subject to appropriations, it was on our website, dccouncilbudget.com. Not only will you find the subject to appropriations chart that Ann does every quarter, which is a phenomenal resource, but we have tons of brown bag presentations we've given on all aspects of the budget. We have a series of dashboards we are continually working to update and improve, including one where you can dig into the specifics of a school's budget or the fees and fines schedule, along with just a host of resources and information that our office produces throughout the year. And so I highly encourage, please check out our website. You can sign up, you can put in your email address and you'll get updates as we update the website and add information. It's a great resource during the budget process. As documents are finalized and available and ready, they get circulated and posted to that website. So it's a great resource to sign up for so you know when all those documents are posted throughout the budget process.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan, for mentioning that, because we are putting more and more up there all the time. And it's, Jen, our budget director, likes to call it a labor of love because it's just us doing it and none of us are web folks. But I have learned how to upload documents and do things I didn't think I would know how to do. But it really is a wealth of information, and I threw up everything we circulate. It's in reverse chronological order on the budget. There'll be an FY22 page, which is the budget cycle we're going into. And we put everything up there we can. We have a resources page where we'll put up all the links to all the responses we get from agencies. So, and if you're interested in a particular agency, you can see like what there's a spreadsheet for contracts. There's a spreadsheet for grants they're getting. There's a spreadsheet for personnel. There's a lot of information out there to dig into. So it's definitely worth just at least a cursory perusal. And there's a lot of sort of, this is very much like a high, like, hey, broad strokes budget, but there's a lot more specific detail provided in other brown bags we do, and those documents are on our site.
Just a quick question. The brown bags then are all open, or are they just recorded?
They're ones we do for council staff, but we put our slideshow presentations up, okay. And if you go and you look through them and you have questions about anything we put up on there, reach out. We love to talk about it. So
yeah, so there's like a budget 101, there's a budget 201, there's one on how to read the budget books. It sort of digs in and explains how when the budget books come out, or if you read the chapters that are posted online, really understanding what they tell you, but also really importantly, what the budget books will not tell you. They are a wealth of information. They're limited because they're printed in their books. And so we try and focus both on what you can distill from when you read the budget books, but also very much what you can.
And I know that I wanted to touch on this. I know there was some discussion at the very beginning of the meeting about the hearing schedules and concerns people have raised about the opportunity for parents to be heard. And Jonathan and I don't work for the chairman. I mean, we work for the whole council. We're part of the central office, so we work for the whole council. So I can't really answer questions specifically about his hearing schedule process. But we did want to provide sort of when those are, and the next slide has information on how you sign up. But I do encourage you, the concerns that you've shared here about ability for parents to be heard is one that I'm sure all of you, because I heard you talking about feeling empowered in lots of ways. So I know that, and I've seen many of you at hearings, so I know that you know how to reach out to council members, but you should absolutely convey those feelings to your chairman, your members, and I mean all of them, and the at-large members as well. This virtual universe that we're in sucks for so many reasons. And one of them is the struggle that the council has had on how to have all its hearings and still honor the availability for the public to view them, for cable television to record them. And there's all sorts of technological stuff that seems to be a barrier that I can't explain. But I know there's a lot of conversations about limitations. We were able to get twice, I think, is it Jonathan, twice as many hearings this year as we had last year? And that was...
We have 2 tracks instead of 1.
Yeah, which is
less than 4. So
it's less than what we had in real life when we're in person and we have 4 hearing rooms. But having 2 simultaneous tracks is better than last year where we only had 1. And while that doesn't solve everything, we have some limitations from the Office of Cable Television and other technology issues that I was really thrilled that we were able to double it this year. Although, you know, I hear you on the challenges. That's about all I can say about that. But I did want to say I heard you, and I will share with the people who listen to me, which aren't very many, that I heard it here loud and clear too.
Laura, has the March 9th hearing, has that already gone up, and are they already taking witnesses for the performance oversight hearing for all the education agencies?
I assume you can sign up. I don't.
The sign up for March 9th is up. I mean, I was able to sign up.
Okay, thanks, Grace.
Yep, so here, I should note that there are a few of these slides that are really just probably more useful as reference. I won't make everyone sit and read this, but I'll get Sandra the slide deck after, and everyone can have a copy, so don't feel like you need to write everything down. So those of you who've seen this before, this is, you know, Ann and I are from Nebraska, so we have a special place in our heart for the milking of cows.
Although we didn't meet until Charles Allen, so let's just let that soak in a minute that we didn't meet. Except through Charles,
True.
even though we
It's
lived in
true.
the same town for a while.
And I stole this quote from a newspaper story about a activist in Nebraska who lobbies our state legislature regularly, who may or may not be my father. But this is his theory of advocacy, which is good advocates milk cows. It's something you do day in, day out, rather than planting corn where you just do it once and walk away. And there are, I think, some good suggestions here that we are happy to take questions about on some ways to be effective, talking to your council members and your council staff about the budget process, but really anything before council. These are kind of the usual ones that we have talked about in past years, but I will just note that this year, in part because of sort of the nature of virtual hearings, in part because there just isn't the same, council member schedules are just working a little differently in this virtual space. There are definitely going to be fewer opportunities to testify, but I would encourage folks to replace that with just invite council members to create an event, use your regular membership meeting, create your own Facebook Live event. They're sitting at home and they are feeling very antsy that they are not at events, seeing people, hearing from people directly. And I mean, I think you will have a lot of success if you say, you know, council member, we really like to hear from you in person. Come talk to us about, you know, what's going on with the education budget. I think you will have a lot of folks say yes to you, because it's just, it's a really weird, hard place right now to actually feel like you are hearing from your constituents and what people, you know, are concerned about. And this is a great, you know, use your membership meetings as a way to give them that space to talk about what, you know, they're thinking about this budget cycle, what you would like them to think about. And it's just, it's not going to be, you know, the same where you can just show up at the Wilson building and there'll be hearings and you can walk into people's offices. Sort of, I think this is not maybe a wholesale replacement for that, but kind of think of it that way.
I would just add to that, like one bonus, maybe one of the only ones that exists to the virtual landscape, is they don't have travel time. So to get to events, so it's easier. I mean, I would imagine, I don't schedule for a council member, but having worked for 2 of them in the past, I just think about how hard it was to do multiple events in any given evening because you had travel time and you know, you had your slot on the agenda or whatever. But now, Zooming, they can pop in to one meeting and say, you know, take their questions and whatnot, and then pop out and go to another one, and they don't have to spend 35 minutes driving around town to get to it. So it's worth asking as many of them to as many things, because there's a likelihood you're gonna, their availability may be a little easier. But Laura, you actually schedule, so I should stop talking.
I think we have 4 meetings tonight, so.
Okay, so why don't we open it up for questions? Is that okay, Laura?
Yeah, I think we just had a couple more that, you know, you are welcome to review these. These are addresses for folks you can reach out to on the mayor's side, and also the chairman's office. And here is how to reach us. So yeah, happy to take any questions.
So it's open for questions.
I put one in the chat, but I'm happy to ask it. I'm curious about this, Donica Petrosha, sorry. Either the budget, well, both the budget committee or budget staff, I should say, as well as Councilmember Allen's staff, like, what is going to be the effort? I mean, we're going to be close to federally almost $300 billion, of which by probably in a few weeks, some portion goes to DC for schools. That's PPP money to our 66 districts, some of them, CARES 1, CARES 2, and then this other one. And of the new money, 20% of that is supposed to be spent on learning, at least 20% on learning loss, academic, social, emotional. What efforts are there at council to find out what these 66 districts have been actually doing with that money, how they plan to use the new money, and what, especially with the new money, with this carve out that they're going to have on social, emotional, and academic supports, engagement to help use that money really, really well. So I'm sort of curious because it just feels like a black hole of money, and we've got a lot of confusion in the community about where's it all gone. And I think that would help us make sure too that the next tranche of money that we're about to get, you know, is well used also on top and actually is supplementing our base funding at the state and local funding levels, not that the feds aren't replacing, but they're supplementing.
So in terms of from what our office does, so we get regular data and we do our best to track all of this. The challenge with the federal money that has been part of all of the federal stimulus response is that it comes in different forms. So there's the big, for example, the big federal payment we got, the $495 million, which is, you know, a pot of money, and we can go into our system and I can tell you where the agency spent it, and then we can follow up and, you know, get the specifics from that particular agency. Some of the other money is new grants. And so that, again, brings in the council's oversight role where you identify the grant, who it went to, and then, you know, our office helps members and offices track down that information and then, you know, help them write questions so that they can, you know, get the policy answers in terms of where, like how it specifically was spent, because the system is only going to tell us so far, you know, where it down, and we need, you know, the information from the agency itself. And then others were expansions of existing grants, which makes it a little, which again, adds a different layer in terms of being able to say, this is existing money, we knew about this much is COVID. So we are doing what we can to track that as much as possible, to identify it and get that information into the hands of the members so that when they are holding oversight hearings, they're asking those questions and getting that much information as possible. As we mentioned, we ask every year as a part of the budget process for a set for all the information about federal grants. This year, we're working on revamping that question so that it also includes notifications and things that we can identify where the agencies are saying all this federal money is in. So we're doing everything we can to pull that information out there and handing it to the members who can then conduct that oversight. The the PPP loans, which are private loans, I don't know what, there may be limitations. I don't know on what we can and cannot pull from that because they are nonprofit entities getting a PPP loan, which has nothing to do with the district's budget. So I don't know for certain what information we can get about that besides asking for it, but but that is wholly owned by them in that regard. It's not district money in that sense.
And I would say that a key part of what Jonathan said is oversight and getting that question. I mean, like you said, we're going to be asking those questions as part of our common budget questions, but a lot of this happens. You know, he talked about when we have grants where the funding is coming through as a modification to an existing grant. And so I don't want to get too like under the Home Rule Act, but that is the universe in which I operate. And under the Home Rule Act, if grants come in that were not budgeted, there is a provision for a grant budget modification where those things can be folded into spending, and we get notification of these things. They're called grant budget modifications. And I try to open them every time I see them circulated, that we have them, just so I have a sense of what's happening. But it is our financial system can be, it's all in a matter of how things are coded. And so one of the things that really needs to happen as part of this process, and I think we'll see it in the initial hearing when the mayor transmits the budget on the 31st, then the next week. Jonathan, do you remember what day we have the?
I think it's on that Friday.
Yeah, so then we just have this televised hearing. It's really more of a briefing from the mayor. You know, the mayor comes, the CFO, city administrator, and they sort of present, you know, like what the high notes or the big things are in the budget. And I really expect a chunk of that time too for the chairman and the council members to ask about how much of what relief is coming is included in this, and how they've spent it and so on. But the oversight hearings that they're doing now in performance are critical pieces for those questions to come up. So if you're testifying, or even if you're not, but you want to know about that stuff, I urge you to email the chairman, email his education staff, email your council member, their education staff, and say, hey, we want to know what's happening with these dollars, so they get asked in the oversight process so we know where they're at right now, rather than waiting for the budget. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff that will happen in the budget, but right now, as they do performance oversight, is the key sort of piece to get your current questions answered.
I mean,
the only
sent
thing
those
I'd add-
questions, just so you know, like we've sent those questions already. We've asked them a million ways. I'm mostly concerned with the CARES Act K-12 funding that's gonna be $300 billion nationally total, which is a huge pot of money for every district. And we have 66 districts and we don't know what's happening. So could Councilmember Allen or somebody lead an effort to just get like a public report? Because like something so that we have like where it's been spent. I mean, gosh, it'd be great to celebrate. Hey, we funded 50 HVAC systems. PPP in our 65 districts got this many PPE. PPP got PPE, I don't know. You know, why can't we use it to celebrate instead everyone's still hiding? Yet they're all our tax dollars, right? I just don't understand why we have to ask a question in a hearing to which they'll say, oh, we'll look into it. Why can't we have an effort to have a public report about all this? This is more money than we've ever seen in we should have heightened proactive council action.
I'm sorry. I wish that I could answer that question for you.
I know, I'm not really speaking to you, but.
Yeah, I'm sorry. If I only had the powers that you wish I had.
I mean, it'd be great if Councilmember Allen could leave some kind of effort like this. Our group has been asking for months, and I don't know, because this money started coming in July-ish, July or August.
Jonathan may know what's in the performance questions. They don't send it to us. So I won't see those until they come back.
You mean from the committee? So each committee usually sends questions in advance. I don't always see those questions. I'm not sure what the committee of the whole is sending in terms of what they're going to ask, you know, in advance of the hearing or what's going to come. Like I said, we are looking in the system. We are trying to pull out as much information as we can. We are following and asking in any places. So we as a central office support the members in that request. So, you know, if any members started pushing that and we could, you know, came to us, we would do everything we can to sort of pull that information. So, you know, it's an ongoing, we do what we can as a central office to track what we can track, but also, you know, we only control so much of the information. And so, you know, if members ask for it, then we, you know, can go and continue pursuing as much as possible.
Just a quick question. So would it be helpful? I think Councilmember Allen is heading up the COVID kind of work, right? I know there was like a technical name for it, but I can't remember. Would it be helpful if we pushed from that perspective, Laura? Sorry to put you on the spot, but just ask, you know, on behalf of Ward 6, whatever families, could we ask Councilmember Allen to kind of wrangle information about how those funds are being spent, and maybe hopefully support him in, you know, in getting to the bottom of as much as possible there.
Yeah, I would anticipate that these are all questions that are part of the performance oversight package. But if there are things that are unanswered after we get the responses back, we're happy to take another look at it through the special committee. And we will be doing an education recovery focused hearing. I don't have a date for that yet, but definitely before the end of the school year. So we can look at it as part of advanced questions for that hearing for sure.
Thank you.
Laura, when you say we will be doing that hearing, who is that Charles? Who is?
Yeah. Yeah, so we are co-chairing the special committee on COVID-19 pandemic recovery.
Okay.
Mouthful. With Councilmember Gray as our co-chair.
Okay.
And because it's a special committee, we're not charged with legislation. It's more topical. So we're going to be doing a series of hearings that are specific to sort of broad themes within COVID recovery. So unemployment, economic recovery, transportation and recovery for the metro system and transit, education recovery.
And they actually don't have
health equity.
I know you mentioned
yeah,
the legislative piece. I just pulled up the council rules because I thought there was something where they're not actually, the COVID recovery special committee on COVID-19 pandemic recovery is not allowed to mark up legislation.
Yep.
So the legislation would go through whatever committee has purview over that agency.
All right, we're coming up at almost 8:30. I first want to thank Laura and Anne and Jonathan. We always appreciate these annual meetings that you have with us, and I think we're really lucky to get this background from you. Are there any final questions before we wrap up for tonight? Okay. Not hearing anything. I
can just say I do encourage you, if you have questions, to email Jonathan and myself, and we'll do our best to dig out answers. I think Valerie sent me some questions last year after this meeting. I'm not sure if any,
including like if there are specific, we might have an answer to some of these questions about a particular spending or spending on technology. Like that may exist in some of the information we have in a variety of places. So if you are curious about some of those specifics on some of the spending, shoot me an email. We can certainly look and see if if I can pull that out from the information we have sort of immediate access to.
and if we don't, then hopefully we can connect you with somebody who can answer it.
And sign up, check out our website and sign up for the updates. It'll be very helpful during budget season.
Okay, not hearing any questions. I think we're done for the night. So thank you all. I see Scott, you're still on the line. Thank you for being with us tonight. And Jessica, thank you too. So bye.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody.
Good night.
That was so abrupt. All right, bye. That's
Sorry,
how
I think I'm tired.
Parties. That's why I leave parties. All right, bye.
I am tired. Okay.
That was great. Okay, I'll stop the recording.
Okay.
Here, let's
Our,